Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about voluntary taxation, how a system without forced taxation would work, even if we have a government. Because as you know, or if you know enough about objectivism, you know the general objectivist position is that objectivists want a government for things like police, courts, and military. However, we believe that taxation is theft and we should eliminate taxation. So a lot of people, when they hear this initially, they decide their initial response is, "Oh, how the hell would that work? How would the government fund itself with no taxation?" And the general objectivist answer is, "Oh, it'd be voluntary. People would pay for these services because they're getting something in reward." In this video, I want to go a little more in depth on that, how specifically that would work, and why I think people would probably voluntarily pay, plus what sort of mechanisms you could put in place to allow for a voluntary taxation system to work and still not be theft. And yeah, I've made a video similar to this in the past. Hopefully this one should be a little bit different. That one was very, very early in my YouTube career when I was a lot less well-spoken. I mean, I'm not super well-spoken now, but I think I've improved quite a bit since I got on YouTube. So let's begin. So with the issue of voluntary taxation, one thing that you need to keep in context, this is my first point, is the idea that everybody's going to have more money. So I mean, that's one thing that you need to understand. Everybody will have more money, so they will be a lot more willing to donate it to the government, since they aren't as close to poverty as they would be without it. So in this sense, or because people aren't being taxed, when your money's not getting taken away from you, you have a lot more money to spend, for one, on your own things, and for two, if you want to spend a little bit on the government, that'd be fine, and you can do that. Obviously, the government wouldn't receive as much in tax revenue, but that's okay because of my second point. The government would be a lot smaller and have a lot fewer things to fund in an objectivist society. So in such a society, you wouldn't have welfare, you wouldn't have Social Security, you wouldn't have Medicare, you wouldn't have public projects, you wouldn't have public parks, you'd have parks, but they'd be privately funded. We can go, I mean, a lot of these things I can talk about in a different video, how it would work without it, but you wouldn't have public funded roads, you wouldn't have all these sort of things. These things would still be there, but they'd be private. I can explain that in another video. If I went into every single example of things that would be private, it would just be too long of a video. But the bill that the government would have to pay to sustain itself basically would be a lot smaller. Plus, I mean, if you just look at police, which is one thing, the police wouldn't have to. You wouldn't have to keep as many people in jail, because in an objectivist society, there would be no laws against non-violent things like drugs, for example. And that is a very large part of our prison population, and it's something that occupies a lot of the time of police officers. So yeah, I mean, this would greatly shrink the government's bill, so obviously less people would be willing to fund it. However, the amount that would be received from voluntary taxation should be enough to cover that, just because people are going to have a lot more money. And if a society is rational enough to want an objectivist society, then I think people would be rational enough to see that they would not want to be freeloaders. They wouldn't want to freeload off the government police, and they would see that, oh, their money is going to something that is in their self-interest, like the police or the military or courts. And then you have the thing about, or the common argument about, what about during wartime? Why can't you have taxation during wartime? I think having a voluntary taxation system would put a very good check on the powers of government in terms of war. The government would only be allowed to engage in rational wars that they can gain funding for, which it means wars that wars against countries that present a clear threat, and wars that are quick and wipe out the enemy fast. Those are the sort of wars that people would be more willing to fund. And then the last point is about a certain mechanism that could be put in place to allow for some government funding. This could be, well, I mean, since the role of government, a big role is to enforce contracts. A good thing for the government to do could be to put a fee for making a contract enforceable. So you can, for example, have contracts between two people, but if they want the government to come in and enforce it, they should have to pay the government for that service. Yeah, so essentially that would be the case. Now, an anarchist might hear this and say, oh, so then the government's just voluntary. What if you just want to pay a different government for this sort of thing? The issue with that would be that, well, in a sense, that makes sense because you could pay like private security for your place or some event. However, if this private security company puts into effect laws that contradict the government's laws, then the government would have an obligation to step in, because essentially, in that case, you are going directly against the government, and that is basically insurgency. You're trying to create a new government, essentially, by creating a new code of laws, and you need to have one objective code of laws to create a predictable and rational society. Holy shit, people are loud as fuck. To create a objective or you need to have more rational laws. Basically is the point of what I was trying to say. I kind of lost my train of thought there because somebody just yelled in the halls. But I mean that's what you get when you are recording on a college campus, which. Yeah, it's very fun. I just keep hearing noises, but it's all good. So yeah, you have contracts, and I think I finished that point. Yeah, so you have contract. So you basically have contract fees where you can pay the government to make a contract enforceable. And this is also an example of just justice. You should have to pay for what you get, and if you are using the government to enforce your contract, you should pay them for that. I mean, that's very direct, and it's also fairly voluntary. And once again, a separate government can't rise up and create its own code of laws, because that is going directly against the government. Yes, the government has the right to put down insurrections. That's perfectly fine, because you want to have one objective code of laws that isn't whimsical. That's the problem with anarchy, that they create whimsical codes of laws. So how could this sort of contract law work? How would there be a lot of people are loud as fuck? Would there be a lot of these sort of problems with, or would there be a lot of examples where contracts want to be enforceable? The answer is obviously yes. There's a lot of businesses that want to create contracts that can be enforced. That's one thing, and there's a lot of property that is involved in contracts, so you can set certain percentages on that. I don't know exactly how the government would do it. You would have to find some method that does it as optimal of a way as possible. But I mean, that's for the economists. That's for the tax policy people to figure out. And that's something that could be voted on too in a rational system, or an objectivist society, or a rational society. Or a free society. That's the word I'm looking for. I don't know. Some people have a problem with objectivists, saying that objectivist society, if I remember correctly. But I think, or it might just be objectivist government. But whatever. There's something that some people have a problem with. That. Yeah, I don't remember exactly why, but yeah, a free society. In a free society, yeah, that would be something you could vote on the specific things, and also you could have like. Think about every time that you go online and there's a terms of service. This could be something that the company would have to pay money to the government for, to have a terms of service that's enforced by the government. That's one example. Another example is credit cards. Credit cards, when you go to a store and swipe a credit card, you're basically making a somewhat long-term contract with the credit card company that you're going to pay the money back, and the credit card company will pay the store that you're buying from. So yeah, in all these instances, that's one way that having a contract or a contract enforcement fee for the government would work well, and that could raise a decent amount of revenue too to cover the government's greatly decreased bill. So yeah, ultimately voluntary taxation, that would be a very smart system that would work. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say for today. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Peace.